Hello, spring. Goodbye, smooth ride. When old man Winter has his way with the highways have their way with your steering and suspension. Now, you've got a choice. Overcorrect and hold on tight, or clear your Saturday for a weekend in the garage with quality Moog parts from your neighborhood Advance Auto Parts. You can also buy tried-and-true Moog parts online and pick them up at your local store just 30 minutes later. Advance Auto Parts. Let's get you back on the road. Some restrictions apply. See store for details.
The following program is a podcast1.com production. From Hollywood, California, by way of the Broken Skull Ranch, this is the Steve Austin Show.
Give me a hell yeah.
Hell yeah. Now, here's Steve Austin.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Steve Austin Show. I am coming to you all the way from Las Vegas, Nevada today. That's right. Today, as I record this opening, it is Monday. Yesterday on Sunday, I left Los Angeles, California. Stopped out in my Ford Bronco, picked up my RV, loaded all my stuff up, and hauled ass running radar to Las Vegas, Nevada. Interview someone here, my special guest on the Steve Austin Show. My special guest had a few issues they had to take care of, so I still had to conduct business, and I'd already lined up a phone call with Cowboy Johnny Mantell. And I'm going to talk today with Cowboy Johnny Mantell about the business of pro wrestling, going back to the New Japan Pro Wrestling match that everybody was talking about, his take on that, my take on it again, as I've received so many emails from you people at questions@steveaustonshow.com. We're going to talk about some of Johnny's days on the road, some lessons learned, one of the most valuable lessons I ever learned from my travel partner, Paul Orndorff, and then Johnny will expand upon that. But it's a pro wrestling conversation that if you love the business, you will dig this conversation. It's two veterans shooting the breeze. We're not knocking the current day product. We're just giving our 2 cents and props to everybody that's still in the squared circle. But if you are in the squared circle, and if you're down there at that NXT camp, or if you're working the indie scene, you can listen to a couple of things on today's podcast that will help a brother or sister out. We're dropping some valuable 411 as me and Cowboy Johnny Mantell, as I talk to him over there in Wichita Falls, Texas, as he's at the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame. It was a great conversation with Cowboy Johnny Mantell, and I hope you dig it. I'm going to keep this conversation short because I talked to Johnny for about an hour and 25 minutes. We'll see what it gets edited down to. I want to apologize right now because I'm at an RV park, and when I'm in my RV, I don't get a satellite signal. I don't get any Wi-Fi over here on my computer for Skype. So I went behind the office, and I was able to log in and talk to Johnny. And, of course, wouldn't you know it, the award-winning podcast, which has never won any awards, I'm right underneath the takeoff pattern from Las Vegas International Airport. So I might talk you through a couple of flyovers, or Stacy might trim them out. I hope you can appreciate the elements I was working with here, trying to give you guys the best can of audio whoop-ass that I can. But I run into so many headaches and hassles sometimes on the road and at the house at 316 Gimmick Street. It is what it is. But anyway, I'm keeping it short. Let's roll into business. My conversation with Cowboy Johnny Mantell. And I got to tell you guys about a great new sponsor that's going to make it even easier than ever for you to buy and sell sports tickets and concert tickets. I know how it is when you want to buy tickets online. Most of the sites make it real hard to find what you want, and then they try to sneak in huge fees at checkout. And that's why you need to try SeatGeek. The SeatGeek app lets you find whatever tickets you want right from your phone. You're looking for Golden State Warriors tickets? Check the SeatGeek app. You want to go to the Stanley Cup Final and see the San Jose Sharks and Pittsburgh Penguins? Check the SeatGeek app. Did you miss out on the Desert Trip on sale so you can see Rolling Stones, Paul McCartney, and The Who out in Coachella in October? Let the SeatGeek app help you. SeatGeek has taken all the work and hassle out of shopping for tickets. They pull all the tickets available from other sites into one place, so you save time and never miss a deal. Every ticket on SeatGeek is given a grade based on value, so you can immediately find underpriced seats. And SeatGeek is always honest and upfront about the price, so you get the full ticket price from start to finish and ain't surprised with huge fees when you check out. And all you Steve Austin Show fans get a $20 rebate off your first SeatGeek purchase. All you have to do is download the SeatGeek app, go to the setting tab, and click Add Promo Code. Enter the promo code Steve, and then the SeatGeek will send you $20 after you've made your first ticket purchase. So download the SeatGeek app now and enter the promo code Steve.
The Steve Austin Show. The Steve Austin Show.
Oh, hell yeah. Good morning. I'm talking to the pride of Montague County, Johnny Mantell. Johnny, how are you today?
I'm great, Steve. It's been a great weekend. The weather's finally given us a little sunshine, and so our rice paddies at home will sort of dry up over the next few days, and maybe we can get back to mowing some grass and getting some things cleaned up around the house, you know.
Man, it's good to hear that area's been getting some rain because, as we talked last time, it's been a hell of a drought in that area. But anyway, I don't want to sit there and talk about the weather again. I got much more important things to talk to you just about the world of professional wrestling. It's interesting today because I'm on video. I can see you. You're at the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame. I am sitting in an RV park in Las Vegas, Nevada. So for those people out there that are hearing the airplanes take off and land, I apologize. It's all for free. Nonetheless, Johnny, the Hall of Fame there looks phenomenal. Is that picture right behind you a picture of me?
It is. It's we have a centerpiece in the hall here where we put all the inductees from this year. So that side of that circular piece there is your side of it, and there's pictures of you up and different things inside a case with pictures and some of the dolls and some of the things that have been produced with your likeness and stuff on it through the years.
Dude, now that I see the Hall of Fame there, I was talking to you last week. I got to find something. I rustle up an old vest or something like that. I think all of my vests inside my closet there at the house, and I know I've got a spare one. And if I can donate it to the hall, that people can come by and check out one of my vests. I gave away a few of those back in the day to a couple of kids that I came across, but I can think of no better place than one to be right there for people to come as they come to look at all the other stuff to see a Stone Cold Steve Austin vest. So mark my words, and I give you my word, I'm going to make it down to Wichita Falls before this year is over, en route to Texas, and drop that vest off. And I'd like to see the hall in person myself, and I'm proud to be in there once again.
Well, we'll sure give you a tour of the place and show you everything we got, and we'd be honored to have something here, Steve. And I just, this is a great point for me to say this, that this hall was built on stuff that were either donated or put on loan. And now with the world of social media and some of the investments that people want to make into buying memorabilia, a lot of our peers, if they'd like to put stuff here at the Hall of Fame, they can bring it here and basically pass it off to the Hall of Fame for us to show for all eternity, and we can give them an in-kind donation receipt where they can go back and take the value of those pieces off their taxes if they need to be. So we're in a unique situation being a nonprofit that we can do a lot of things to make sure that this continues to grow and be what it needs to be.
Hey, Johnny, let's go ahead and jump into a little bit of talk about pro wrestling. That's a big part of my audience is the business that I came from, the business that I know and love, and same with yourself. Spent so many years on the road. A hot topic in the last couple of weeks was a match on YouTube that was forwarded to me between a young man from England named Will Ospreay, who went to the London School of Lucha Libre. I didn't know they had a Lucha Libre school in London, but they do. He's a very talented kid, and he was wrestling against a young man who goes by the name of Ricochet, or on Lucha Underground, which I really enjoy watching on the El Rey Network. He wrestles as Prince Puma. So I got a chance to talk about my thoughts on this match. You go back kind of a half generation, full generation before me. You're an old school guy. I would love to get your thoughts on this match as you saw it. Tell me what you thought.
Well, two great young men that can do a lot of good things, but from my school of thinking, it was so obviously choreographed that it was not real, And again, like you said, I'm a generation and a few more years. I mean, I'm 58 now. I've been around this business, in it, smartened up to it for 40 years, and the thing that was drilled into my head was to make it real and make the people believe, and that was my come away from that video that you sent me of that match, was that I took nothing from it that made me think it was real. There were some great things that happened, but sometimes they do those things so fast and in such an order that it becomes a big blur and you don't really remember or recognize anything from it. So again, the kids today, I don't want to say nothing negative about them, but I think that wrestling needs to have a little more realness to it than a little more predetermined kind of things. It just needs a little more realness to it.
Some of my takeaways from that match were, again, both guys, probably two of the best athletes I've ever seen in a ring, to be able to do some of the same moves at the same time ever. So the fact that mechanically they were so good, the reason if I had a promotion I would hire these guys is because if they can do everything that they showed me in that one match, now they didn't sell near enough. They didn't sell near enough. But just as far as a spectacle or a performance, it was just off the charts. But my point is, if they can do these things, then certainly they can be coached to, hey man, some of this stuff is pretty good, but you've got to sell some of this stuff. And one of the other things I thought was just a viciousness, when a sense of urgency and trying to pin another guy. It needed to look more like an athletic event. It needed to look a little bit more like a contest, so to speak. And again, I gave the guy high praise for being able to pull this thing off because, Johnny, what I saw was kind of like a video game performance. And if those guys were shooting an action movie, a sequence or a fight sequence, the sequence that they did it lasted almost 20 minutes. On a movie set, that whole match might have taken anywhere from 10 to 50 takes, and these guys drilled it on one take. So I give them a lot of credit and a lot of praise on the precision and the timing because it was off the charts. But just for me, being the old school guy, what I said on my last podcast, Johnny, when I was talking about this match, again, props to the two guys who did it, but I'm just a big fan of that mid-1980s style from World Class, Mid-South, NWA, and, the Attitude Era, which I performed, was still pretty damn good. I enjoyed what we were doing in the ring. But I go back to that mid-80s style where the business hadn't been exposed yet, for the most part. I still thought it was real. The guys were really protecting their calls in the ring, but just the work. It looked like an athletic endeavor. It was presented as a shoot, and I took it as an athletic contest. You follow me?
Absolutely. It always was a contest, and I think that that was the key, that we made it a contest. There was a real contest to it, and I got to tell you, I went to an independent show here about a month ago in Amarillo, and a good-looking young kid in the opening match, great-looking kid. But every time he went in to tie up, he shook a leg in a certain way. And after the match, he come to me and he said, "What do you think?" And I said, "Well, here's what I'm going to tell you." I said, "I loved what you did. I liked what you did out there. You took your time and you sold and told the story." But I said, every time you tied up, you shook your leg in a certain way. And I said, I'm just going to tell you from a wrestling guy's mentality, after I saw you tie up like that 3 or 4 times and I got that timing of your leg shaking, for me, in my mind, the fans are going to think less of me because they know I'm a technical wrestling kind of guy, that the 4th or 5th time you shook that leg, I'm going to double leg takedown and take you to the mat and take control of you, because that's my style. That I see something, there's a weak point, there's a rotation or a redoing the same thing over and over. Well, I'm not going to lay there and take 15 elbows. Surely sooner or later something's going to wake me up and get me to move out of the way of one of them. So the same thing with that tie-up. And I think that's my take on wrestling, is that it was always, like you said, the early 80s, it was always an athletic contest. There was always two competitors in the ring getting after it, and that's the style that I like. I like a definite, somebody's cheering for him and somebody's booing for him, and then that contest in the ring, and that's what I missed today.
You talked about, kind of breaking in and then going under a mask for a while. And then when I first started in Dallas, Texas, I went to Chris Adams' wrestling school for about, I guess it was 5 months, but it was only training once a week. And so then on Friday nights and Saturday mornings, I would wrestle as Steve Williams. And it was basically a squash match. P.Y. Chu Hai or some of the other, Phil Hickerson. Some of the hot heels in the territory would just beat the trash out of me with weightlifting belts, kendo sticks, and I went to Jerry Jarrett, and who had just bought the territory from Fritz Von Erich, and I said, "Hey Jerry, when do you think I can start working full time?" Because I was still working on a freight dock at the time, and he goes, "Hell, Steve, I think you're ready now." Well, I wasn't technically ready because I was greener than grass. So, shoot, 2 weeks later, man, there I am driving my Hyundai Excel down to Memphis to the Mid-South Coliseum, where Dutch Mantell, no relation to you, was the booker, and I showed up. And Jerry Jarrett didn't even tell Dutch that I was going to show up. And I said, well, man, I'm here. And right there on the spot, after over about a 30-minute conversation, Dutch Mantell christened me Steve Austin, because I couldn't be Steve Williams, because Dr. Death had already been through the territory and there would be confusion on the card. My point is, Johnny, when I started, and man, I was green, but I had some great veterans in there. Gary Young, gorgeous Gary Young, taught me a lot. Billy Joe Travis, superstar Bill Dundee, Nightmare Danny Davis was so giving to me. What I liked about that territory was it was a weekly territory. Monday through Saturday, we worked every single night, and that's what helped me get my chops up. And the thing that was super scary back in the day was when all of a sudden, if you're working Nashville, the fairgrounds, you've probably been there many times, as you know, the Hills and the Babies dress on opposite sides of the building. So all of a sudden you got referee Frank Morrell, and he'll come in there and give you the finish. And you're thinking, okay, well, what am I going to do up to that point? Well, the veterans were calling it in the ring. So I learned from the get-go. I said, they taught me to finish. Either I was going to catch something quick, the guy was going to beat me with his finish. That's all I had to remember. And when I go back and relive some of those old days, it was so refreshing because I was like a sponge. I was absorbing all this information every single night. And it was so easy to do, Johnny, because I had these great 10, 15-year vets leading me through a match, and all I had to do was whatever they said. And then classic Ricky Steamboat style, Steamboat was so good because, first of all, he was a great wrestler and a great performer, but he always could just fill in the gaps. If you grabbed a headlock on Ricky Steamboat, you didn't have to tell him top wrist lock. As a guy who's going to try to get out of the headlock, it only made sense to top wrist lock, and then the heel could either pull the hair, overpower him, or maybe Steamboat would overpower the heel. The point I'm making is, calling it in the ring led to a cadence that seemed realistic. And from a performer in the ring, I've seen guys, that are in the current system, they'll forget a lot of things because they've got everything set up from A to Z. And if you forget LMNOPQR and you leave that segment out, you're screwed because your transition of your match, a whole step has been removed and nothing makes sense. What are your thoughts as far as calling stuff in the ring? And if you've worked with a guy, you can set a few things up, but it just makes it so much easier, so much more fun, and so much more realistic to me by calling it in the ring. Maybe I'm too old school.
Well, I learned the same way. When I went down to Louisiana my first summer in the business, I was fed the greats. I mean, from the Assassins, Jody Hamilton and Tom Ernesto, to the Medics, Stan Hansen, just the greats in the business that were in Louisiana at that time. I got to work with all of them. And like you said, you just basically showed up. You were in separate dressing rooms, and you literally got a finish, and then you went to the ring, and it was one of those things, shut up, kid, and listen and learn. And we were sponges. We were that generation of people that you got that opportunity to learn from the very best, and they taught you when to shake a leg, when to raise an arm, when to start a slow comeback, and sometimes you'd want to be too fast, and they'd slow you back down and say, now listen, do it this way. I mean, that's how it was done in those days, and I was so blessed. Leroy and Bill Watts treated me so well in Louisiana that first summer in the business. As a young kid, I was learning, so I didn't think about the double work and all that, but every night, for about 2 of my 3 months in Louisiana, I would work in the semi-main tag team match, and then they always took a captain's match out of that tag as the opener for the night. So I was working twice a night, every week. They'd do 2 shows on Saturday, 2 shows on Sunday, so I'd work twice on Saturday on one card and then twice on the other card. And sometimes those tag matches would go 35, 40, 45 minutes. So the education I was getting, I always tell people, that education I got that summer from the greats was like taking a cram course in a kinesiology class or some type of really high-tech class where you got to learn a lot of big words and learn how to write them in the right order and do that. That's what I was learning that summer from these guys that were so gracious enough to take their time and work with me and train me and make sure I could be the best I could be. And that's that same education you got for that time there in Memphis where you got to work with those guys. And Gary Young was here for the induction weekend and said kind things about you when you first started there in Memphis and getting to work with you.
Man, it was always a pleasure to go into the ring with Gary Young. And here's the thing. I think probably you would agree with me on this. And I'll ask you, the number one thing that green guys or young guys do wrong in the business is rush.
Oh, slow down. Take your time. Make sure the guy in the very top row of the building can see and understand what you're doing. If that guy in the top row can't see it, then nobody else is understanding it. And I say it all the time to these kids. They come to the house. We still have a ring and a little area where I do little things with guys when they come into town. And I tell them all the time, slow down. Take your time. Draw that picture of who you are. If you're in a town for the first time, and especially in today's world with only trying to advertise on Facebook and some social media things and a few posters around town, nobody knows who you are. So you have to go to that ring and tell your story from the very beginning. And I think that's being lost a lot today, and they need to slow down a little bit.
I agree. They need to slow down a little bit. And I'm not going to sit here and be the bitter old-timer. You and I are older school guys. I got out of the business in 2003. Johnny, when did you have your last match?
2005.
Okay, I want to get to why you end up getting out of the squared circle. But so anyway, you got out in 2005. I got in 2003. But as we know, I'm a huge football fan, and the game of football has sped up. The game of baseball, everything, as far as professional wrestling has sped up. It's short attention span theater these days. But I knew that the business of pro wrestling would evolve, and it has. Hell, from going back to the days when basically there really weren't any high spots. Do you remember, Johnny, before I continue my rant or my paragraph here, were you around when everybody was already using high spots? Because with all the footage that you've had to look at to get people into the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, certainly you've seen your share of footage when there wasn't really any high spots being worked.
Boy, to watch some old footage of a Billy Robinson match or a Bronco Nagurski match, or even watching some this year of Hans Schmidt and Joe Pazendak, they were struggles in the ring. There wasn't a lot of high spot kind of stuff. A high spot might be a hip toss into an arm bar or an arm drag and a roll through to a cover or something like that. I mean, it was just a much slower time. But again, like we just said, even in that slower time, it still was a very athletic contest. You could see a struggle in the ring, and I think that's really the key, is that whether it was no high spots or some high spots, it was that struggle in the ring that caught your attention as a fan of wrestling. And I had the great privilege of working with Gene Kaninsky when I went to Portland, Oregon in 1978, and he said to me one night in Seattle, Washington, he said, "I'm going to blow you up tonight, kid." And I said, "No, sir, you're not blowing me up." And we went to the ring and wrestled 25 minutes, and he was a nonstop kind of guy from that era where it was, top wrist lock, arm bar, over the hip, and down to the mat, and then back up and into a turnbuckle. And he was a nonstop kind of guy, but I was always one that I always felt like I didn't want to ever run out of air. When I was an amateur on the mat, I ran and trained because I didn't want somebody to beat me because I ran out of air and ran out of gas. And I always tried to live that way in the professional wrestling ring, and I ran as long as I could through the years on my old knees. And then when they stopped, it was more of a constant doing something that kept me sort of fit enough to get in the ring and work. And again, as I got older, then I became that old timer, and I knew when I could set the match down for a minute and take a breather if I needed to, and regroup or rechange the direction if the fans weren't going the direction we were wanting. So there was a real advantage of learning it like you and I did, because we learned those little tricks, let's say, that I think today are really being forgotten.
Two things I want to take from that. First of all, a change in directions in a match. I'll come back to that. But let's speak to the high spot. Because give me, Johnny, your definition of a high spot. What it is, why it happens. Because I got mine.
Well, my definition of why it happens is because you're trying to tell some point of a story in that match. So if I'm the guy in the ring and the people are yelling and screaming and booing for me and I'm working with a young kid that's wrestling and stuff, I want to create that spot to show that maybe he's a little younger, a little sprier, a little faster to his feet, or something to show the difference between him and I at this point in that match. And that's the reason for that high spot right there. Whether it's a block, a hip toss, backslide down and roll through and back up on your feet, whatever it may be, I want to tell some part of my little story I'm trying to get across in that match at that point of time. And it's not something for the big picture. It's something for that moment to lead to the next step.
And basically also, but what it springs out of, if say you and I are working, you're calling the match, and you've got me in a headlock, you're going to call the spot. But basically the spot is because, you have me in a headlock, so I'm trying to escape from this hold through a series of moves. So, hey, if it's tackle, drop down, hip toss, arm drag, or, back into the headlock, whatever it is, the high spot originates to escape from a hold. It's transitioned to try to come out on top. It doesn't always work in your favor. Depends on how the match is being called. But you don't run high spots just to go hit the ropes and do a bunch of somersaults and flips. I mean, and that's kind of much of the way the Will Ospreay Ricochet match was. It was just a bunch of hitting the ropes and displays of athleticism. Again, I give those guys credit, but there's a reason for the high spot. It's transition to escape from a hold. There's a reason for it. You don't just start hitting the ropes just for the sake of action. You're working the people. You're telling a story.
Yeah, I say this all the time to some of these kids, and I don't mean it to be tacky or rude to them, but I said, you guys flipped and flopped great, but there was no reason why you flipped and flopped. And there has to be a reason to everything you do. I mean, again, you go to other sports, and I know wrestling's different than other sports, but it's still, like we said, an athletic competition. And you go to other sports, and there's a reason why a catcher and a pitcher has a set of signals, and they change the pitch up to get people off balance and to try to get through that inning and get out of there. Well, the same thing happens in the ring and in athletic competition. You have reasons why you get to this point or why you get to that point. I want to build a matchup to the very end where that comeback and that finish is going to pop the crowd one way or the other. You can only have that happen. That pie is only going to rise if you put in all the right ingredients. You got to have the right ingredients in that pan to make that pie rise. And that was always, and I'm sure you'll say this about your career, sometimes it wasn't the part that got to the finish, but the finish had to be the defining moment. But you had to get the match done right to make that finish do what it had to do. And I think sometimes we get more concerned about the flipping and flopping than maybe the reason why we did it.
It's great to have a crowd pop, at a high spot because they're emotionally invested in both characters, and it's not just for the sake of two guys hitting the ropes. There's a reason for that high spot, but to your point, the high spot is just incorporated as far as who has control, and finally that heel has to either cheat or do whatever he needs to take over, and it's time for the heat. But in that, you throw in the hope spots to bring that baby back up, and then you climax with the finish. So many of the matches these days start out so hot and fast. By the time they get to the finish, to your point, hey, you flipped and flopped great, but it was a steady line. There wasn't a build up to crescendo with you being so invested in that babyface who you want to make that comeback because that dastardly heel has kept him down and maybe, heaven forbid, has cheated to stay on top. And then it's Katie bar the door. Well, I don't care if it's 1975, 85, or 2016. Katie bar the door. It's time for a comeback. That baby face is fired up or pissed off, and everything happens, and then they go through the comeback, and then there's the finish. Whether the guy slips on a banana peel, he gets beat by a screw job, or someone does the favors clean. There's the building process of that match, and I think a lot of the building process has been lost.
Yeah, I do too, Steve. It's part of this process, like we say, the evolution of what's happening today, and that match that you and I are talking about. I read through a lot of the comments, and probably a dozen or 100 different spots, and I'd always take my time and sort of read down through the comments. And again, some people really like that, some people didn't like it, and I'm like you. The athleticism and the ability of what they did was fantastic, but if I had my moment in the sun with them, I'd tell them to slow down and let everybody absorb those great things they did.
Hey, guys, I want to say thanks for supporting the Steve Austin Show and all the great sponsors. And to show my appreciation, I've worked out a special deal with our friends over at Dollar Shave Club and arranged for them to give new members a month of the Executive Razor for free, just for buying a lube of Dr. Carver Shave Butter. Swig of water for Dollar Shave Club. So now there's no excuse not to join the millions of others who have joined the club. DollarShaveClub.com/Steve delivers amazing razors right to your front door for about a third of the price of what those greedy razor corporations charge. That means when you become a member of DollarShaveClub.com/Steve, you can afford to shave with a fresh blade anytime you want. And we all know how great it feels to shave with a fresh blade. I've got the executive blade, and when you pair it with Dr. Carver Shave Butter, it's about the smoothest shave money can buy, and that's without breaking your wallet. And Dr. Carver Shave Butter ain't your average shave cream. It's a unique formula made with natural ingredients that will leave your skin feeling soft and smooth. So join DollarShaveClub.com/Steve now. And new members who buy a tube of Dr. Carver Shave Butter get a month of the Executive Razor for free. Take advantage of this special offer today. Go to DollarShaveClub.com/Steve. That's DollarShaveClub.com/Steve. All right, Johnny, you've been around the world a couple of times. Damn near 3 decades in the business. I had my run. If you had any advice to a young kid going into a territory to try to get over, what kind of advice would you give him? Because you see a lot of people, and I was probably guilty of this myself back when I was just trying to get noticed, taking a crazy bump or just doing something to get someone's attention. And someone would say, hey, you got to take a look at this kid. Whereas, hey, man, had I been more mechanically proficient and just a real good, smooth, hard worker who had a believable style, might have got just noticed just as fast. But to the kids coming out of, say, a program like NXT, and they're just trying to get noticed, what would you tell those kids?
Well, I'd sure tell them to protect their body. Be sure they're protecting their body, because there's long-term problems that you and I can attest to that will hit you later on in life. So the first thing I tell them is protect their body. Next thing I tell them is take a realistic approach. If you're 6'8" and 340, then use that to the best of your ability. If you're only 5'10" and 205, you got to find a way to use your abilities to the best of your ability to catch somebody's attention. And you have to realize that. And I always go back to my father as a young kid. He'd always say, and I know it was a movie off or a line off some movie, every good man knows his limitations. And you don't want to put yourself in a position where you're going to do something that doesn't make what your style is or your physical ability is look odd or funny, because then I think you lose that somebody taking a look at you when they get that funny feeling about what you're doing. In other words, when I worked with Andre the Giant, the times I did in California, and a guy the other day put a match results from a show at the Olympic Auditorium where Ron Starr and I worked with Walter Johnson and Andre the Giant, and the fact that match took place, I told my wife Kay that I said we probably worked on Andre a lot and made him sell because we wanted to keep Walter out of the ring because he was really heavy and tough in the ring to work with. So we probably worked on Andre, and by working on Andre, we worked on his legs. We wanted to chop that tree down and get him on the mat where we could be equals with him. But we did that because we wanted the people to believe that we were beating this guy up, and the only way we knew to do it, because he was so much bigger than us, was to chop him down like a tree. And I think that's the key to this business, whether it was then or now. You have to do something that the people are going to grab a hold of. And we wanted to make sure that they understood that this 7'4", 450-pound man wasn't going to be in a high spot where one tackle, get it again kind of thing with a guy like me that was 6'1" and 235. It wasn't going to happen because I was running. It was a car wreck when we were going to have that happen. If I had to run into Andre, I made it look like a car wreck because of the size difference. And I think that the guys of today have to realize that. And I know when I first started, we talked about a finish for me in a lot of different places. I used a couple finishes during my career, but they always said to me I needed to use a finish that I could do to everybody. You didn't want to use a finish, and then when you got put into a match with Andre the Giant, and my finish was going to be something where I had to pick him up and do something with him, and you weren't able to pick him up and do something with him. And I just think that the guys of today just need to slow down a little bit, and they really need to look in a mirror and understand what they're capable of doing and what they're capable of producing, and then really work and hone that craft. And you said it a few minutes ago about your start in Memphis and getting to work 6 nights a week. I think that's one of the things that's really missing today, is because guys are only training in a ring a couple nights a week, or they're only wrestling 6 or 8 times a month. It takes a few months, even a year or two, of that kind of consistent work day in and day out to really hone your craft, get your timing, and understand when something does mess up, you have to immediately address that problem. If something messes up, you can't stand there and go, oh, and try to fix it that way. You got it covered up by grabbing a hold or getting to the mat or getting right back into whatever situation it may be. And that's part of that education that I think today is having to be taught a different way. And I don't know that it's as easily explained as it was to you and I when we would just shut up and listen and do what they said.
Dude, I've heard a million Andre stories, and you got a chance to work with the guy, and you were working with the guy probably at the age where he could probably still throw a drop kick and was still fairly agile for a big man, because a lot of people know Andre as the slower-paced giant that he would become, and I say that with huge respect because Andre was a legend that transcended the business. But, man, I've also heard, hey, man, Andre used to be a hell of a damn athlete before he really got the giantism. So how was he to work with? Because I've heard from first-hand accounts from Ravishing Rick Rude and Jake the Snake Roberts, and, Andre, he wasn't real fond of Jake, and so a lot of times he would stand on Jake's hair and just pull him up back by his arms and, basically pulling the hair because it was beneath Big Andre's size, 26 or whatever feet. How was he to work with? Because I heard if he didn't like you, he let you know it. But this was later on in his career when he was the boss and he was in the WWF. It was his locker room. How was he back in the day?
He was so much fun to work with, Steve. I had my privileged time to get to work with him was during the 1980 year when I was under the mask in L.A. as the Hood. And I got to work with him probably 10 or 12 different times. He was so much fun in the ring, and thank goodness he liked me because he never, one night he pulled part of my mask off and just laughed about it, and he didn't do it on purpose. It just happened. I wore this mask that had sort of material that hung out the back, and I always called that my hair, and he grabbed those white straps that night and pulled them white straps completely off my mask and just laughed. And but he was so easy in the ring. He was so light. He really was. When he picked you up for a body slam, it must be the feeling of a fly landing on a horse's butt because he did it with such ease. And to sell, he would sell for you. I mean, again, I'll give you a real quick Andre story. I always played cribbage with him in the dressing room, and we were in Fresno, California in a theater building one night, and him and I are playing cribbage. And we drove in. I drove in from Southern California, and it was raining up when we got up there, but it wasn't stormy or anything like that. But Andre would always, when he'd get dressed at night, he had this little wrap he'd put around him. He wouldn't put his trunks on right away, but he'd put this wrap around him, and he'd lace his boots up and get his boots on. And then he'd sit in the dressing room and play cribbage. Well, we're sitting on these wood benches inside this theater room, dressing room, and we're playing cribbage, and Andre was always a great prankster. He always loved playing ribs and doing stuff, and it was raining outside, but again, it wasn't storming, and all of a sudden, there was this noise like thunder, and I jumped up from the table and looked out the window to see what was going on outside, and Andre just started laughing, and I thought, what is he laughing about? And then when I turned back around, he had just passed a little gas on this wood bench, and it sounded like thunder, and it made me jump up. But he was such a gracious man. He traveled with me in my little car. He'd have to sit sideways in the back seat, and just a super guy. And really, like they said, man, he could throw a drop kick. He could give you a big high hip toss or a big high backdrop. He could work and do anything in the ring. I mean, he really could.
Dude, tell me about traveling down the road with Andre the Giant, because I've heard so many stories. Before I got to the WWF, Arnold Scullen used to drive him around, and Arnie was there forever with Vince. And then when Arnie was not going to drive him around anymore, it shifted to Tim White, one of my favorite referees to work a match with. And Tim White would drive him around. And, you know, when Andre he could call Tim Timber, and he'd go, Timber. You know, and Tim had been out with him all night long, and Andre, as you know, could drink his ass off because of the body weight, and he could just drink. And so, you know, Tim was about to tap out, but, you know, if the boss says he wanted to drink, Timber, you know, had to answer the call. And Tim just reflects on those times with a big smile on his face, shaking his head and talking about the good times, about how generous Andre was. But he actually told me for a shoot, he said, man, Steve, I really thought I was going to die during my time with Andre because I had to drink so much. And he meant that with all due respect and nothing but high praises for Andre. What was your dealings with him as far as just his drinking or being on the road or having good times with him? Because I don't get the fact that you were ever really a party guy. We've lost, you know, so many guys in the business due to, you know, pain pills, muscle relaxers, all the bad stuff that goes with pro wrestling. But you were never one of those guys. Reflect on traveling with Andre, because you've got to have some types of tales of mishap or good times with that guy drinking beer.
Well, you know, one thing with Andre and I was under a mask when I got to travel with him, so I got to ride. He got to ride with me, and even though we would work together, we'd always work that out, getting into a building where that was never an issue, us driving up together. But our time together, I was never a big drinker. I did have times I'd fall off the wagon, and I did some of the crazy stuff out there on the road, but I was just never a big drinker. I had 2 times in my life where I thought I wanted to drink, and both times I drank so much I made myself sick and decided that's not for me. And so with Andre, I never did drink. You know, when he'd go in, he'd always buy enough beer for both of us, but I was a Pepsi guy or a water guy, and that's what I drank with him. And it always astounded me by the stories that he would tell me sitting in the back seat as he'd hold if he was having beer that day, he'd have a 16-ounce can of beer in his hand, and you couldn't see it, you know, and he might drink it in 2 or 3 gulps and it'd be gone, you know, but the stories were always really more about life and more about some of the issues that he faced because he was so much bigger than everybody else, and maybe the problems, you know, finding the right woman. I mean, there was plenty of women to be with him, but to try to find the right woman, I got a lot of that insight from him, you know, when I got to travel with him. It was always to me, it was always an educational moment, and I understand why somebody would smile about their time with Andre. I mean, I do the same thing with Ernie the Cat Ladd. I got to travel with him one summer in Louisiana, and he rode with me for a couple weeks straight, and he did the same thing, sat in the back of my old Ford Granada that I had. He'd sit in the back seat sideways and tell me football stories with Lynn Dawson and training camp stories and different things about the transition from football to wrestling. And those times, man, again, I've been so blessed in my life to get to play with some of the greats in this business and then to hear them talk to me as a peer. I'm just humbled and honored by it. I really am.
Man, a lot of people didn't get a chance to see the big cat Ernie Ladd either work or listen to him talk. And when you say Big Cat Ernie Ladd, just because of some of his talking abilities, I immediately just flash back to the greatest of all time, Muhammad Ali, who just passed away a few days ago as we speak. And so I just flashed back to Muhammad Ali, and I wanted to talk to him a little bit about. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about Muhammad Ali because he was a boxer. And he would be the first to admit that he was a wrestling fan, and Gorgeous George was an influence on maybe his promo style, but then Muhammad Ali was, to me, one of a kind, one of the most original or completely original promo guys. Obviously, an amazing boxer, entertainer who took the sport to levels unheard of. It was interesting watching the UFC 199 pay-per-view just this past weekend. UFC did a wonderful job of paying respects to Muhammad Ali and the Ali family. But out of all your days, I got a chance to cross paths with Muhammad Ali in about 93, 94. I was down in WCW. And for some reason, where we were in Orlando or maybe Atlanta, but Mr. Ali was coming through, and I was traveling with Paul Orndorff at the time. And Paul had the wherewithal to bring a pair of boxing gloves. I didn't bring anything, but I got a chance to meet Muhammad Ali, and this is while he was, still talking. Did you ever get a chance to meet the man, or your thoughts on what he did for the sport of boxing, or just for the sport of just being in a squared circle, entertaining?
Well, I never did get to meet him in person. He's been a big part of my life. When I was a kid and growing up, and he started his rise and winning the gold medal in the Olympics, he was one of those guys that made everybody believe that if you worked at it and you worked hard at it, you could become anything you wanted to become. And I finally took a picture today. I have about a 4-foot by 6-foot replication of the great picture of him standing over Sonny Liston when he knocked him out. I have that hanging in my dining room, so anybody that walks into my house sees this big picture I have of him. And I took a picture in front of it today to honor the family and to show the world that I don't think it's, if you're red, white, purple, green, black, whatever it is, he transcended an era at that time where a lot of the older people didn't like him because he was so mouthy, but he was really just saying what we all really want, and that's just equality and equal rights, and hey, let's just all get along. That's what he was preaching, and I've always looked up to him for that fact. And I know my brother and him had a little interaction during the Ali Inoki deal that they did with the MMA and boxer deal. My brother Kenny had a little interaction on him, and what it was my brother Kenny was in Atlanta that time, and he was doing a radio show, and they got Ali on the phone, and they were back and forth, and Ali had a little poem at the end of that session, and he hung up on my brother on air. So that's about as close as I got to any communication with him. But yeah, a tragic loss, a loss not just for boxing in our country, but a loss for everybody around the world about equal rights and hey, let's all get along and be together.
Oh man, again, Muhammad Ali is gone. I just wanted to mention him on the podcast because, man, I think I just don't know anybody that's walking around that's, man, over 25. And people under 25 knew who he was, but I mean, dude, especially for my generation, I mean, to get a chance to see, him in his prime and all the stuff that he did, the Rumble in the Jungle, all the classic fights he had, how he sold a fight. I mean, dude, Johnny, in selling a fight, we've seen, Chael Sonnen in the UFC talk me into watching him fight Anderson Silva, and then now Conor McGregor. I don't know how much you follow the UFC, but great promos, sell matches, and Ali was the absolute master. Whether he was selling a match or debating with kids at colleges, the guy had a gift of gab, but was obviously extremely intelligent and, again, like you said, very, very progressive and very forward thinking, and he would speak his mind no matter what platform he was on. And he didn't ask for your respect. He commanded your respect, and he got it.
Yeah, and, I think, too, he was ahead of me so much that, you and I can't imagine. I mean, I remember coming back to Texas to see my brother Kenny's first match in Dallas, his very first wrestling match here in Dallas. And I remember coming back to that match, and we went to some department store in Dallas while we were in town that day. And I'll never forget seeing the signs on restrooms that said black and white. And I didn't understand them. I was just a kid, and I didn't understand them growing up in the area I was growing up, and I didn't understand that. And now we have to think about, him being that much older than me. I think it's 16 years older than me. And him growing up in Louisville, Kentucky, where there was really a lot of racism and stuff. So his youth and his growing up was so different than mine and yours growing up that it developed this man into what he became, and that's why he was such a leader in trying to create equal rights and everybody getting along and becoming one nation under God, and whatever that God may be. And there's he's one of those one in a lifetime kind of guys that we're not going to see another one. It'll be many years before the generations ahead of us get to see somebody like him.
Man, quite frankly, I don't think we ever will see another guy like that. I just think now, in the world of everything, first of all, the world being as PC as it is, but really first and foremost, above and beyond that, I just don't think there's ever going to be another talent that's as athletic, that's as bright, that's uncanny, so smart and charismatic. All the things that he was, I just don't see walking planet Earth again. I just don't.
Yeah, you may be right, man. I'm sure people in the 40s and 50s thought that of Babe Ruth, and I'm sure,
right.
and even though there's never been another Babe Ruth, there's been guys that have done the things that he's done, and for a lot of years, nobody thought there was anybody better than Lou Thez, and then all of a sudden there's a next generation, and so I agree with you. But as time changes and time goes on, there's going to be somebody else at some point in time that stands out the way Ali did, that's going to command that kind of respect. And he may not be a boxer, he may not be a wrestler, he may not be a sports figure at all, but there's going to be somebody eventually that's going to stand out and make that impression in life, sort of like he did, because we've seen it through the history. I mean, I'm a big history guy, and history shows you a lot of great people in different ways, and they come out of different settings and different places. So, but I think in our lifetime, in my lifetime, being 58, he was probably one of the greats that you've ever had the privilege of being involved with, whether it was just in TV or seeing him in fights or following him through the news, whatever it may be. He's one of those guys that transcended. I mean, there's no doubt about that.
Hey, man, let's segue off of that and respect to the family of Muhammad Ali and Muhammad Ali. Thank you for all the wonderful memories. All right, got to take a minute to say thanks for supporting all the great sponsors of the Steve Austin Show. That's how I'm able to do 2 podcasts for you every week for free. And there's one sponsor that I don't podcast without, Onnit. Onnit makes Alpha Brain, and y'all know that I always take a couple of Alpha Brain and a few swigs of coffee before I start any podcast. Alpha Brain keeps me on my A game. I'm sharp and focused and able to conduct badass interviews and answer all your questions. And if you want to be on top of your game, then get yourself some Alpha Brain at onnit.com/Steve. And if you do, you will save 10% off your order. You can get 10% off anything you order at onnit.com/Steve, including Shroom Tech Sport and T+. Now listen, Shroom Tech Sport will give your workout a boost. It helps you go longer and recover faster. It's made with natural ingredients, and it ain't loaded up with artificial stimulants. And T Plus increases strength and power. It will improve your athletic performance. And it's safe to use if you're competing. So go take advantage of this 10% discount off your order. Just go to onnit.com/Steve. And another great thing about Onnit and all their products is, if they don't work the way they're supposed to, you can get all your money back, no questions asked. Money back guarantee. So go to onnit.com/Steve to get your 10% discount off all supplements. That's onnit.com/Steve to get 10% off your order. You mentioned a little bit about history, so I'd like to ask you a little bit of history about tag team wrestling, because you've tagged with many guys. You teamed with Rotten Ron Starr for a long time, and to me, I know you still watch current product, whether it's independent stuff, stuff in the big companies. In your words, and then I'll express my thoughts, because I love tag team wrestling. What, in your opinion, has been lost as far as tag team wrestling goes?
Well, I think that tag team in my day when I started, there was definite tag teams, and you knew they were one mind synchronized to exactly what they were doing in the ring. Everything was tied together. And, I've been privileged and honored to be in the ring and around a lot of great tag teams, and there's a tag team that doesn't get a lot of credit, and very few people talk about them. But there was a Hispanic tag team that I had the privilege of getting to train with and getting to meet out in California, and that's the great Goliath and Gordman tag team. They were, to me, the textbook. You could look them up in the encyclopedia and have these two guys, because there was never anything that wasn't tied together that you knew a pair were doing together. They were such a dance team, and they were so easy to work with in the ring, and they always made their opponents look as though they were equally as good. And I just think that today we're trying to put people together to make a tag team, and I know this New Day group, they've really caught on, and I like some of the things those kids are doing. There's some things they do that I really don't care for, but there's some things they do that I like. And I think that a tag team has to be, you don't have to be related by blood, but you have to make the fans and the audience believe you're related somehow, because you are thinking with one mind. And I don't know that we get that across as well today as we used to.
But also, just as far as the tag team action itself, and you mentioned a little while ago the Assassins, I guess that would have been Jody Hamilton and Tom Ernesto, correct?
Yep, yes, sir.
And then if you went to let's talk, Ole and Arn, and before that maybe Ole and who's that, Gene?
Yes.
But let's classic Ole and Arn, because I saw more of their work. But back in the day, I mean, the Minnesota Wrecking Crew, their MO, Johnny, was cut off the ring. Get that baby face on that side of the ring so they didn't have a chance to tag, work a body part, and make that babyface fight for that tag. And they'd keep him alive, and there wasn't any alligator arming on the other side. That guy was stretched out trying to get that tag. And, you know, it was a story. And it's different. There's a difference between an established tag team going out there and working as a unit, picking a body part, or one guy starting off. It was no different than myself and Flying Brian Pillman as a Hollywood Blondes. We were put together kind of as an interim tag team to get guys over, and we ended up kind of starting to get over, and then they split us up. But, you know, Brian would go out there, and I'd see what he did, and, okay, this is the direction he wants to go, here we go. Or maybe, you know, Brian would start off the match. I'd say, okay, but I think I'd like to shift in this direction, and I'd make that decision, and then he'd go along with me. And then we'd work as a team. We'd cut off that ring, Anderson style, and make that babyface fight for the tag. It's almost like the tag team situation has turned into, like the current single situation, where it's just more about trying to pander to that crowd, then work that crowd and focus your attention on what's going on in the ring rather than what's going on in row 100. To your point, talking about a green guy earlier, yeah, you want the green guy to slow down enough so that the row 100 knows what he's doing, but take and focus your attention on the task at hand, and that's within the confines of a 20 by 20 squared circle. Work your opponents, and then organically, when it's time to turn to that crowd or engage that crowd, then you can do that. But you don't just start off pandering that crowd, waving them on and stomping on the apron to get them involved. It's got to be an athletic contest. Maybe I'm beating a dead horse. Do you follow me, Johnny?
Oh, I do, man. I do. And a tag, again, that's what the great tag teams. I had the privilege of being in Japan and getting to see Stan Hansen and Bruiser Brody as a tag team. Oh, my goodness. You talk about cutting off a ring and creating a fight. And, back in the day of a young Bill Eadie as a mass superstar in that tag team, they'd get after it, man. If you were on the other side of that 20 by 20 ring and you weren't out there getting after it too, they'd gobble you up, spit you out, and put some extra sauce on you and do it all over again. And that's what those tag teams, those good tag teams like that, really developed. That's what they created in the ring. They created that, like you said, cutting that ring off to take control of the match. And they obviously made that happen. They made sure that everybody in the 100th row or wherever could see that they were doing that. And I think, again, sometimes we're more concerned about an individual getting over or something else getting in or doing something instead of that part of this story we're telling tonight being involved and creating their moment in the ring. And boy, some of them old tag teams really did that.
Man, when you mention Stan Hansen and Brody on the same tag team, I mean, Jesus Christ, both of those guys, you talk about physical. And Stan would always say, it was about, hey, when I take these glasses off, I don't see so great. And Brody was always, he was a pro wrestler. If you look under definition of pro wrestling, there'd be a picture of Bruiser Brody. To me, I thought he exemplified, what one was supposed to be with the way he conducted business in the ring, and they commanded your respect. And the way they worked back then, Johnny, like it was so physical. If I was telling a young tag team these days, if you want to learn something about tag team wrestling, you can watch all the razzle-dazzle stuff from this generation or the generation before. But if you really want to get to the nuts and bolts of a hell of a contest, go watch some of those Hanson Brody versus, it might have been Dory and Terry. And it's funny, when I mentioned that match, you can see that Hanson and Brody work a little bit lighter with the Funk brothers because of the respect factor, and they were all Americans in the ring, but because some of those things were just flat out slugfest. But my point is, just as far as a nuts and bolts, basic psychology, and learning what a tag match should be all about, you can go back and look at that stuff that I'm talking about and we're talking about. But when you mention the name Bill Eadie, let me just go ahead and bring that. Bill Eadie was obviously one half of Demolition in the WWF way back in the day. So people that might not have known that name when you dropped it.
Well, I have a great story. I was not on this card that night, but I have a great story that I've been told by numerous people about this night at the Omni. And there was this young tag team getting started in Atlanta called the Road Warriors. And Bill Eadie, as a masked superstar, and Stan Hansen flew into Atlanta straight in from Japan, and they put him on TV with the Road Warriors. And so the story goes, and I've heard it from a lot of different people, after that match, I think the words were saying that the Road Warriors didn't want to work with Bill Eadie and Stan Hansen anymore. So my point I'm trying to make is, when you talk about those guys in the ring that really got after it and worked you over and made sure that you were at the same level they were, you were at the same intensity they were, those guys that we're talking about had that intensity in the ring, and I've seen them. I've been in the ring. I've never had the privilege of working with Bill, but I did work with Stan and Frank, and you had to be ready to go or they would go without you. And I just, like you said, man, I tell kids all the time, look up this name. Watch what he did. Look up this guy. Watch how they did it, because if you can emulate and put some of their style into what you're doing today, you're going to get the job done.
It's funny that you bring up the word intensity, because I think that has been lost. And it's a hell of a coincidence, because I was driving to Las Vegas yesterday in my RV, and I got a text from PJ Polacco, who wrestled as Just Incredible, and he was referencing. He goes, you know what? I was going back to some of your earlier work, and he goes, I think you were ahead of your time because of your intensity, and and that was a sign of things to come. And I started thinking about it, and I was like, I wasn't going to put myself over, because I'll use my one four-letter word on this podcast. This is family friendly, but I was a drizzling shit when I first started out, because when you first start out, you're not very good unless you went through school for a hell of a long time. But I was once a week for 5 months. But to PJ's point, I did have a level of intensity that could not be denied. And so one of the things that I see today is sometimes a lack of intensity. And when I go back and watch the classic matches, whether I watch you and World Class, the biggest body of work that I can find on you, a level of intensity and focus. The same thing with a Jerry Lawler, who didn't work a frantic pace. And Jerry was actually more of a brawler, more so than a wrestler. He incorporated wrestling. It was done in a wrestling ring, but his intensity was always there. but you didn't rush anything. So intensity doesn't mean speed. It doesn't mean flat out aggressiveness, but it means that this is important. And there's focus, and to that point, it ends up looking like an athletic endeavor. It looks like a contest. Intensity for all the bells and whistles and things that are being done in many of today's rings. Intensity sometimes seems to be lacking because the guys are thinking so much about what they're doing, and the next high spot, they're just trying to put on a daredevil show, and it doesn't translate. And real quickly, I have a good friend of mine who plays lead guitar in a band, and he's so good and so fast. I asked him one time, I was talking about Zakk Wylde, and I said, Zach, I said, when you're playing all these off-the-chart guitar solos, I said, what are you thinking? And he goes, Steve, you're not thinking. He goes, if you're thinking, you're stinking. So I think so many of these kids, or some people, get caught up in, what they're supposed to do rather than, the task at hand. It's just intensity, tell a story, keep your focus in the ring, and let it unfold. Because if you're thinking, hey, I got to do this, I got to do that, Johnny, after you spend a couple of years in the business, I'm sure that's when your comfort level is like I texted PJ back the other day. It was after about a 4 or 5 year stint in the business that I finally realized I could actually relax and have fun. I'm not laughing and joking out there, but I can have fun while I'm in the ring, but my intensity is still high, but I'm relaxed and putting on a show. So intensity is a big part of what I think sometimes is missing in today, because it's all focused on razzle-dazzle.
Yeah, I think that a couple of my fun opponents in my career were Tatsumi Fujinami from Japan, All Japan, and Pedro Aguayo from Mexico. And those matches I had with them, our communication was limited because the difference in languages, but our communication was enough in the wrestling world that we could have these great matches. And I always look back on my matches with the two of them in particular, that they were always great contests. And I always had this feeling that they were leaning on me like you would get on an amateur mat. And when I had that feeling in the ring, I felt really good, because I really felt like I was in a contest and we were in a struggle working with each other. But yet it was, like you said, by the time you got educated enough to this business, and I say this to young kids today, when you walk through those ropes, you have to be at home. You have to know exactly where you're at, whether you know where you're at or not. You got to know that you're 2 foot from the rope or 2 foot from the turnbuckle, because that makes a big difference in what you're doing with your opponent and how you're doing it. And I think that those kind of thoughts are not in the front of the line when they're thinking about a match. They're thinking about, like you said, the razzle-dazzle part. And I think that's really one of the keys to anything that you do. That intensity is, when to speed it up, and when to set it down for a moment. I'll never forget, I'm 18 years old, and Dory Funk was flying in and out of Los Angeles to work with Chavo Guerrero in the main events. And my brother Kenny told me, he said, you go up in the balcony of the Olympic tonight and you watch this match, and you watch how Dory Funk controls the people. And I again, I'm like you, man. I was greener than grass and not worth a nickel. And I went up there and watched him that first night, and literally you could see him watch the crowd, and the crowd would start to get up and start walking up the aisles to go to the concession stand, because they were doing an hour of Broadway, and he'd get. It just seemed like every time Dory lets just a certain amount of people get up and start heading towards that concession stand, and then he'd get Chavo up off the mat out of a hold, and they'd do a little spot, and everybody'd run back down them aisles and sit back down the seat so they could yell and scream, and then all of a sudden, boom, he'd have him on the mat again and back down in a hold. And you could see him working that hold and then working that hold, and the people start getting up and start heading towards that aisle again, fixing to go get that hot dog or that beer. And all of a sudden, Dory'd do something, and man, they'd come running back down them aisles and sit down and yell and scream. And it was a beautiful thing to see for a young kid, like you said, as a sponge, trying to learn this business, because you were sitting there scratching your head and thinking, wow, what control he has, and he looks like it's effortless to him.
And the thing about a match like that, when I first started watching Dory, I was like, I didn't get it. And I was like, man, this guy, he sure does work slow. But as I gained more education through my, process of being on the road and being in the ring, all of a sudden I was thinking, man, Dory Funk, he just looks a little slow out there. But all of a sudden, when I started understanding the business, that's when I realized how outstanding and how badass of a worker Dory Funk was, and came to respect him at a super high level. Because, and to anybody out there who's talking about learning the business, go throw on some Dory Funk Jr. Just go put on some Dory Funk, and you're gonna think, okay, this match might be a little slow. It might be a little slow for today's standards, but if you want to learn, it sets the bar for just workmanship, mechanics, and here's another thing. The guys, yourself included, and hell, even me working without any hair, being bald, protecting my calls. So you can learn a lot from watching a Dory Funk Jr. match, and just the way he controlled the crowd, and just the way he worked. There was no holes in his game. Everything looked like a shoot, and he wasn't out there roughhousing people. And Dory was a big guy, not a bodybuilder guy, but Dory was a big man, and big drink of water. And so he wasn't, as was Terry, and two had totally different styles. But to your point, one time I was on the road traveling with Paul Orndorff, and he had worked a match with Paul Roma. And you know Paul very well. You feuded with the guy. Yeah. And me and Paul were traveling down the road, and they went about 15, 18 minutes that night, and Paul went over. And, it was a pretty typical pro wrestling match, 1993-ish. And, man, at one point, Paul just grabbed an armbar on Paul Roma, and who was very athletic, good hand in the ring, and they would later tag. But he was just standing straight over Paul Roma, had an armbar on him, and it just exemplified power. It exemplified control. And at that point in the match, he was the man. We were driving down the road after the match, and I looked over at Paul. I said, my favorite part of that match? And they had already done high spots, a great comeback, and went into the finish. And he says, he pauses for about 20 seconds. And he says, I know. He goes, it was the armbar. And I said, how of all things? Yeah. Dude, I said, how of all things did you know that would be my favorite part of the match? And he looked at me and he goes, Steve, it was about control. And that's all he said. And it just rang. The bell started ringing in my head. The light came on at the end of the tunnel, and I got it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. There's moments that transcends the entire match like that, and we have a great picture in the hall here of Dory Funk and Nick Bockwinkel, and they were wrestling for the AWA title, and you can tell that Nick had some kind of armbar on Dory, but Dory was delivering an elbow to the head, and it's right when the elbow got to the head, and it is a great picture signed by both of them, and that just completely is the definition of what you're talking about, that intensity and that moment of strength. You see both these guys' legs and their muscles split where they're in motion, and that's another thing that I think sometimes when you are talking about intensity in the matches today and the past, sometimes they get so involved in thinking about this spot or what they're doing in their next move that causes that lack of intensity for a moment or two, because they're thinking about something else instead of that whole match putting into their whole bodies going into it, so that everything they're doing from head to toe is really defining that moment in the ring. And there's just guys that could do that night in and night out. And as you're exactly right, Terry and Dory, as far as styles, are different, but as world champions, they both did that around the world for a long time, and did it with the greats around the business. And sometimes they'd go into territories and not work with the greatest hand in the ring, but would get the same kind of match over, because that's how controlling they were in the ring to make it believable.
Oh man, I don't. Let's shift gears just a second here, because I just love to tell stories and parallels about today's business and compare it to the old times. I'm not knocking today's product. I just want the guys in the ring right now to watch some of these old matches and either remember or learn from some of the greatest of all times. It's the little things that mean so much, whether it's control, just snugging up, looking professional, being a pro's pro, and protecting your calls. The point I was trying to make, Johnny, is the little things, which just seem so basic, mean so much. Just the lockup. I think you talked about the shaky leg earlier, a crisp lockup, the control. All the little things add up in the big picture, and there has to be substance. There has to be real meat to a match. Hey, I got one more thing to tell you about before we wrap things up. The Resurrection of Jake the Snake documentary is finally out on DVD and Blu-ray. Now, this is the inspirational story about how Jake the Snake turned his life around with the help of Diamond Dallas Page and DDP Yoga. And even if you've seen the documentary at one of the screenings that Dallas hosted last fall, you should still get the DVD, because Dallas and his crew put a ton of extras into the DVD. There's over 20 bonus features, including commentary by Dallas, Jake Roberts, and director Steve Yu. I've seen this documentary more than a few times, and it gets me every single time. And y'all's emails have said the same thing. It's a tearjerker. It'll grab you by your guts and rope you in. It's that good of a story. It ain't a wrestling documentary. This is one man's journey to turn his life around, reconnect with his family, and restart his legendary career. And right now, you can get the collector's edition of The Resurrection of Jake the Snake at ddpyoga.com/Austin and get 10% off anything you buy for a limited time. So get the documentary and get inspired, and then get yourself on the DDP Yoga program and do all that for 10% off by going to ddpyoga.com/Austin. As Dallas always says, all you got to do is commit. And when you see what that commitment did for Jake the Snake, you'll want to commit too. Start living a healthier life today. Go to ddpyoga.com/Austin for a limited time. Get 10% off anything you buy. I know, Johnny, with all your years on the road, we talked about this before we started this podcast, before we do the go home on this thing. You had a story that I was interested in hearing. Nobody believes you, or some people believe you, but you were traveling with Rotten Ron Starr and you saw something one night. Drop that story on me. What happened? Because out of all the things on the road, tell me the story.
Well, you know, this is probably about 1979, 80, somewhere in that time frame, and Ron Starr and I are tagged up with the great Baron Leone's promotion in Northern California, and we're tagged and working for him. And we're leaving Sacramento one night. We had a place we were staying up in the hills. We had a house, sort of a community house where we could go and crash and didn't have to pay a lot of rent. And anyway, we were driving up there, leaving the matches one night, and we're in Ron's van, and we could see off in the distance, and we saw a light sort of hovering over the highway. And the other cars on the highway that were on us, it was sort of a deserted highway, but there were some other cars. You sort of see them sort of swerve and then get back on the highway and keep going. And as we're seeing it driving up, Ron and I both look at each other and I said, "You see that?" I said, "Yeah, what is that? Is that a helicopter? What is that?" And it was like this beam of light. And as we got closer to it, Ron was driving and he kept slowing the van down. And he finally pulled off to the side of the road as we got right up over this big white beam of light over this highway, and I wish I could remember the name of the highway leaving Sacramento. And when we got over to the side of the road, Ron started to open his door, and we were going to sort of get out and look at it. That white light went out. There was this circular motion of a bunch of different colored lights on the bottom of this, whatever it was, and then it took off, and it was gone. And we both sat there for a minute in that van, and we looked at each other, and we said what we saw, and we both agreed. And even to today, and Ron's health is not the best today, but we still are in communication. A dear friend of mine. We still talk about that night all the time, and we still remember seeing the same thing. So was it a UFO? Was it something that Northern California air bases were working on? I don't know for sure, but it was something I've never seen again. and I've never seen before. And a lot of people say, well, you know, you guys out in the 70s during that time and the hippies and all the, you know, and all that kind of stuff. And, hey, we might have had some influence in us that night. But for us both to see the same thing and still to talk about it some, 30, 40 years later, it was something that we saw. So those are just, you know, and again, you and I have a bunch of them. All of us have those kind of stories, and that's what's so cool about this business. We can all relate to those kind of stories, and I know that we haven't got to everything you wanted to get to, but I got to throw one other little story in for you, Steve, that I think you'll really enjoy. And I don't know if you have ever had the privilege of meeting Don Leo Jonathan or not, but
no, man, that's a guy that Brett the Hitman Hart speaks so highly of this guy, and so I started watching him on YouTube, and this was a guy, I mean, hell, what was he, 6'7", 6'8", 260?
They called him the Mormon Giant. And so the story goes, when he came to New York to try out for Vince McMahon Sr., they got him in the ring, and he got somebody up in an arm bar, and he ran up a turnbuckle and got to the top rope and tight rope to the top rope all the way around the ring back to the turnbuckle he ran up. And so the story goes, Vince McMahon Sr. said, oh, well, I don't know that we can use him. Nobody's going to believe Bruno can beat him. And that's what kind of guy this was. And I had the real privilege to get to work with him out in Seattle when I was working in the Portland territory in 1979, part of 79. And I'll never forget this, and it's a funny story. You'll really enjoy this story. And it's a young kid, not very smart, against an old veteran. And a lot of people don't realize Don Leo Jonathan's father wrestled as well as a professional wrestler. But anyway, we were working in Vancouver, British Columbia, and got in the dressing room, and I'm working with Don Leo, and there's a little break in the action, so I go outside, and I call home back here to Texas, talk to my parents and everybody here at the house, and my brother Kenny gets on the phone. He says, hey, how's everything's going? Who's on the card tonight? So I ran down the list of names, Gene Kaninsky and Don Leo Jonathan and Dutch Savage and Johnny Eagles, and I go down the whole list of names, and he says, who are you working with? And I said, well, I'm working with Don Leo Jonathan tonight. And he says, hey, will you give him a message for me? And I said, sure. Again, not being very smart, being awfully young and dumb. I said, sure, I'll give it to him. And he said, well, ask Don Leo if he remembers the time in Japan that I took him down. Well, no red flags went up. Nothing went up in my mind saying, be careful of that. It just said, I'm going to deliver my brother Kenny's message. So I get back in the dressing room. Now it's getting time. We're both lacing up our boots and doing stuff. And he said something to me, and we're talking, and he said, hey, how's your brother doing? And I said, hey, by the way, my brother has a message for you. And he's literally, Steve, got his head down, lacing up his boots. And I said, my brother's got a message for you. He said something about he wanted to know if you remember the time he took you down in Japan. Oh, no. He never missed stride, my friend. He just kept right on lacing that boot. Oh, yeah, I remember that. Just kept lacing his boots. So we get in the ring, and the match is just spectacular. I mean, it's flowing. We're just having a great match, and to tell you about this time, I was the heel and he was the baby, but we're just having this fantastic match, and I call this, and he's letting me call the match now. I'm 3.5, fixing to be 4 years into the business, and he's letting me call this match, and I call this thing where he gives me a turnbuckle, and I stagger out, and he's going to give me a snapmare over, and we're going to calm the match down for a second. So I hit that turnbuckle, and I was always one that hit him. I tried to hit him as hard as I could, and I hit that turnbuckle, come staggering out. He snapmares me over right onto my butt, and all of a sudden, both my arms go up above my head, and there's no air or oxygen in the ring anymore. There's none. Oh, he had me hooked up, man. He had me all hooked up, and I'm telling you, there's no air, and I'm getting to the point now where I'm starting to panic about my next breath. And I never wiggled or I never panicked. I just was selling like I normally would in a match. But in my mind, I'm starting to worry about the moment that I'm having right now. And he leans in and he says, tell your brother I remember. And all of a sudden, there's air and oxygen back in this building. So anytime after that, I would always say to him, Mr. Don Leo Jonathan. And when we got into the dressing room, I walked up to him and I said, Mr. Don Leo Jonathan, thank you so much for that education. And he said, you're welcome. and just had a big smile on his face. So needless to say, I never delivered any messages ever again like that.
Hey, dude, I'm gonna give you a story that's kind of a parallel of that. I was the guy who was just new to Tennessee. I'd just driven in. I was working babyface, and I was trying to find someone to ride with. I've told this story before, but it's such a parallel of what you just told. I was talking with the Undertaker, who was, I guess he was the Punisher. I don't know what he's working with down there in Tennessee. And so we were going to ride together, but since he was heel and I was baby, we had to kayfabe, so we didn't ride together. And I said, all right. I knew that we had a 6-man tag that night, me and Dutch and somebody else against him and Soul Taker and somebody else. And I said, all right, dude, I'll see you tonight. I said, I told him to watch out. I said, I might end up stretching you out there, just words to that effect. And I was just kidding. I actually have a pretty good sense of humor. Well, Mark is a man's man, and he's kind of, if you know anything about the WWE, he's the king of the locker room. He's the go-to guy in the WWE. Has been that way forever. And I didn't know his sense of humor. He didn't know me from Adam. And, of course, all of a sudden there's a time for me and Undertaker or me and the Punisher to lock up in that match. And because I just got out of wrestling school, I only know a little bit of chain wrestling. I know how to take a bump. And he puts a couple of damn sugar holes on me, and I'm just kind of laying there. It was Evansville, Indiana. It was Tuesday. It was in Louisville, Kentucky. And there I was in the middle of the ring for about a minute and a half. He proceeded to put 2 or 3 holds that he had learned in Japan, and he was a big MMA fan way back in the day. So I'm in there laying in the middle of the ring, getting twisted up like a pretzel, and all of a sudden he decided enough was enough. Now, he wasn't hurting me, but he was just stretching me and letting me know what time it was. So I tagged out. And, someone else goes in the ring, and Dutch looks over at me on the corner, right there by the ring post, and he goes, "What was that all about?" And I just shook my head. I didn't know at the time. I said, "Hell, I don't know." But, I had insulted him on the phone by telling him that I was going to stretch him. This punk kid from Dallas, Texas, with long blonde hair, 2 months in the business, said I was going to stretch him, and he didn't take a liking to that. So I quickly learned from that point on. I didn't call him Mr. Punisher, but I learned a lesson that night that would stick with me forever.
Yeah, same thing here. I mean, I can't tell you the nights that Dick Murdoch or Tom Ernesto would get me in the ring, and I'd said something wrong in the dressing room, and they would just call spot after spot after spot with them standing right in the middle of the ring and me do all the running. And then all of a sudden, after about 7 or 8 of those, and they know you're huffing pretty good, now all of a sudden they're leaning on you in the middle of the ring, maybe got you in a back chokehold, and they're got you bent over. They're leaning on that belly and your lungs, and they're just sort of laughing in your ear, trying to smarten you up a little bit. But those are the educations that, going back about this whole conversation, I think those are some of the educations that maybe don't get taught as well today, and it doesn't stick with the guys like it did you and I when those moments happened in our career.
And those are fun lessons, and they're lessons of respect. And you always respect the business. You respect the guys that came before you. There's a protocol. And when you get your ass handed to you, sometimes in a shoot way or in a friendly way because they know more than you do, or it's kind of a semi-rib as your brother sets you up for, and you learn a lesson from it. That's all paying dues, and that's all learning about the business, and that's part of the business, whether it's a shoot or just done to let you know what time it is. The memories that you have that you always remember, and you look back and you laugh your ass off and smile about.
Absolutely, man. I laugh about that all the time. I did a podcast with Don Leo here about 4 or 5 months ago, and when they brought me on, I just went right into that story, and his response to my story was, well, sometimes there's just lessons you had to learn.
You know what? Next time you see Don Leo, just tell him that Steve Austin said hello. And, man, I was a big fan from afar when I got a chance to see his work. And really, in my opinion, that guy should have had a much bigger run than he did. I quite frankly think he was 10 to 15, 20 years ahead of his time. He had a good run. He had a good, solid run. But, man, had Vince Sr. known what to do with that guy, with his looks, his size, his body, are you kidding me? I just thought the guy was fantastic. So give him my respects. Hey, Johnny, I'm going to head over to my RV, and I'm going to send this show in to Stacy. Next time I talk to you, I'll talk to you on the phone. I'm going to set something up. I'm going to end up in Wichita Falls. I'll bring a vest, and let's shoot the breeze and talk about the old days in person.
Absolutely. And one other thing, man, I'd like for you to get me maybe you and your lady shirt size, or if you want some kid shirts or something. I'd like to get an address or something so I can mail you some stuff from the Hall of Fame, because now with you being in this Hall of Fame, you'll become a voter just like Don Leo Jonathan is for the Hall of Fame. And I just want to make sure that you have some shirts and some stuff. I'd like to send you a program from this year's induction so you can see what we're doing. I'd just like to send that to you so you can sort of see what we're about and what we're doing.
Hey, you got it. And one more time, Johnny, plug the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame and the hours that you guys are open one more time for the people that listen coming through that area.
Absolutely. The Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame is now housed in Wichita Falls, Texas, in what is called the iconic Big Blue Building in downtown Wichita Falls. Our hours are Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday from 10 to 6, Fridays and Saturdays from 10 to 7, and Sundays from 1 to 5. And we're open to the public every day that we're here. Mondays we're closed and sort of our regroup and clean and get ready for the rest of the week. But you can come in, and there'll be somebody here that'll help walk you around and show you everything we have. And we're just getting stuff in by the day to keep displaying. And when we fill this first floor up of about 7,000 square feet, we're going to move up to the next floor, and we have 3 floors in this building.
And Johnny, I know that you go ahead.
Oh, and I was just going to say, in the website, pwhf.org, for all your information and stuff about what's happening here at the Hall.
And, man, you've embraced technology. You are on social media. You have a Twitter account. On Twitter, you can find Johnny Mantell at Cowboy Mantell, Mantell. You good?
I'm good, man. I'm good, my friend.
Well, I apologize for all the airplanes buzzing over. It was great talking to you. I'll see you over in Wichita Falls very shortly.
Thanks, Steve. God bless.
All right, everybody, give me the go-home cue. It's time to wrap up this podcast and ride off in the sunset. But before I do, I got to give you guys something to watch. I'm going to say this one time. I'm going to say it one time only. I've been watching Bloodline, and I highly recommend that damn show to you. And this last time I'm going to recommend it to you, I turned my buddy Kevin Nash onto it. And Kevin Nash is about as picky of a human being when it comes to quality acting and quality writing as can be. And Kevin Nash is digging it. Didn't mean to name drop you, Kevin, but if you're digging it, it speaks volumes as to how good this dang show is. So I hope you guys will give it a shot. I enjoyed watching both seasons myself. I'm anxiously awaiting next year when they come out with season 3. Cliffhanger time. Check it out, folks. I think you'll dig it. Hey, man. Thanks to Cowboy Johnny Mantell for giving me an hour and a half of his day. Always a pleasure talking to him. I told Johnny I'm going to bring him one of my vests down there for the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, and I'm going to try to get down to Johnny here in a couple of months. Depends on when the window opens up for my shoulder to get solid enough. When my therapist lets me out of there to do things on my own, and when I do, I'm going to try to get to Wichita Falls and talk to Johnny, and I am going to put one of my vests in the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame. I'm honored to be there, and Johnny, I look forward to talking to you in person and shooting the breeze, old school style. One more time. One for the Gipper. Hey, man, BrokenSkullRanch.com has my Broken Skull IPA. It's got my Broken Skull knife. It's got my Broken Skull T-shirts. If you want to get anything Steve Austin, go to BrokenSkullRanch.com. I want to say thank you very much for the word-of-mouth advertising you guys are doing on behalf of this podcast. I don't have an advertising budget. I appreciate y'all supporting the sponsors of the Steve Austin podcast, because if it was not for them, I would not be able to do this for you free twice a week, and this show is always free. There is a paywall for the past episodes, but if you just sign on to the Steve Austin Show and it's new to you, this show will always be free for the working man. In that dynamic, nothing has changed. It's just the older episodes are behind the paywall because there's bandwidth and storage fees, and that's the bottom line. So I do this show for the working man, working woman, and it will always be free, and that's the bottom line. It is what it is. I have no control over that. With that being said, let me say thanks to my sponsors. SeatGeek. Download the SeatGeek app and enter the promo code Steve to get a $20 rebate after you make your first purchase. Thanks to DollarShaveClub.com/Steve. Buy a tube of Dr. Carver shave butter and get a month of the Executive Razor for free. To Onnit, go to Onnit.com/Steve to get 10% off your order. To DDPYoga.com/Austin. Get 10% off anything you buy for a limited time only, including the collector's edition DVD and Blu-ray of The Resurrection of Jake the Snake. And, of course, a big thank you to Amazon. They've been supporting this podcast since day one. If you want to help us out, pay our production costs, use my Amazon links when you're doing any online shopping, because Amazon will kick back a couple of bucks to the podcast. Doesn't cost you anything extra. There's no hidden fees or charges. Whatever you plan on buying, you help out the podcast in the process. And you can find my Amazon links by going to podcast1.com, clicking on the Killer Deals button in the top right corner of the page, and then hitting the Steve Austin Show button. Bookmark it. You can find it in one click. Hey, folks, keep listening. The 60-second AP News headlines are coming up next. Until then, my name is Steve Austin. I am sweating my ass off here in Las Vegas, Nevada, and I will catch your ass down the road.
Download new episodes of The Steve Austin Show every Tuesday at podcastone.com. That's podcastone.com.
I want to say thank you to Drop Stop, one of the great sponsors of this show. Drop Stop is the original patented seat gap filler, as seen on TV Shark Tank. Get the original Drop Stop at buydropstop.com and use code STEVE for 2 free gifts and free shipping. Stay tuned for the latest AP News headlines from Podcast One right after this.
When shopping for car insurance, consider this. Geico has been saving people money on car insurance for over 75 years. So if you're serious about savings, it's simple. Go to geico.com. After 75 years, they know how to save you money.
AP Update, I'm Ross Simpson.
I see your true colors shine.
The Orlando Gay Chorus sang at a candlelight vigil tonight for the 49 people killed and 53 others wounded at a gay nightclub in the city early Sunday morning.
We are here to say that love will overcome in Orlando, Florida, because that's who this community is. And we stand together.
Brian Fullwider with the Interfaith Council of Central Florida says the city will heal.
Our love and prayers are with all of those family members who have lost loved ones, with everyone who has a family member laying in the hospital right now. And our prayers are for recovery and for healing.
President Obama will travel to Orlando on Thursday to pay respects to the victims of the nightclub shooting and to stand in solidarity with the community as it embarks on recovery. AP Update, I'm Ross Simpson.